If you're in NP school, thinking about going to NP school, or know anybody who has ever gone to nurse practitioner school, I'm sure you are wildly aware that finding preceptors is almost more challenging than school itself. But good news, it can be done. And in this video, I'll share with you the strategies I use to find and secure clinical placements in my family nurse practitioner program. If this is the first time we're meeting, welcome, I'm Liz. I'm a family nurse practitioner and I just graduated from my program in May of 2018, so I totally feel your pain on this. And if you're currently scrambling to find a preceptor, I just want to tell you it's going to be okay. You will find one. We may have to get a little bit creative, but it'll be okay. Let me just say, for full disclosure, my school was technically supposed to find all of my clinical placements. That's actually a huge reason why I chose to go to that school, but obviously things didn't work out quite the way I planned. And when push came to shove, I was usually a couple weeks into this semester without a preceptor, kind of twiddling my thumbs being like, what's the deal here? Can we say stressful? So after this had happened a time or two, I started to take things into my own hands, because it's really no fun to be sitting there for the first month of your classes knowing that you're supposed to be racking up all these hours and it's just not happening because you have nowhere to go. Fortunately, I was able to secure 2 of my clinical sites, which ended up being about half of the hours I needed total, using the methods I'll talk about in this video. And I hope they'll help you secure some sites as well. Also, I've heard a rumor going around that by 2019, maybe 2020, nurse practitioner schools are actually going to be required to provide you with clinical placements. But like I said, a lot of those schools, even if they're forced to provide you with one, they could be hours away from your house, or it could be a situation like mine where you didn't get around to it for a little while. So I think these will be good to have in your back pocket just in case. Alrighty, so first, let's talk about the facilities we're gonna look at and how we're gonna find them. And as always, organization is going to be key here. So go grab a tablet, your journal, your prettiest notebook, and your favorite pen to make this task a little bit less daunting. Coffee, wine, chocolate, that also may help. Now, we're gonna go to our good friend Google, and you're gonna wanna type in family medicine and then the city you live in. Obviously, this is going to change. I was a family nurse practitioner, so most of mine were in family clinics. If you're a peds NP, you know, you'll do pediatrics, you get the point. I think you can figure it out. Urgent care, women's health, whatever, it all works the same. Now, write down all the names of the offices you find with the contact info next to it. Usually this is just the phone number of the clinic. Sometimes you may get lucky and there may be an email or something. Make sure to write that down, but usually they just give you a clinic phone number that's going to direct you to the receptionist. Once you've got your town down, all the names written down with the phone numbers, you're gonna go 1 town over, and then 2 towns over, and then 3. And you're gonna wanna kind of keep going until you have like 30 places written down, which I know seems like a lot, but trust me, it's gonna be helpful. All right. So now that you have your list, the real fun begins. You always dreamed about being a telemarketer, right? I thought so. You're gonna wanna channel that passion, because my friends, that's what you are going to be for the next 4, 5, 6 hours of your life. But halt, before we get cold calling people, let's talk about who I would probably call first and what you're gonna say when you get a human on the phone. First of all, obviously different sites you're going to have better luck at. What sites did I have the best luck at? Federally qualified health centers. To find your local federally qualified health centers, which there are those in every single area, that's one nice thing about them, you're just gonna Google federally qualified health center, and then again, the county you live in, and a whole list should populate of all the ones in your area. And if I were you, these locations would be at the top of my list for the following reasons. 1, the people who work in them are generally the type of people that are willing to accept students. 2, management sometimes seems more lenient to allowing students because they're so used to having them. They have a lot of med students, residents, it's a teaching environment usually. And 3, for your own personal benefit, these sites, while challenging, provide a huge learning opportunity for you as a student. Now for the clinics that I would probably not avoid applying to, but maybe put them at the bottom of your list. And those are gonna be health centers, clinics, offices associated with large teaching hospitals. For example, when I lived in Michigan, the University of Michigan Health Center was like everywhere. They had dozens and dozens of offices, so when I looked, that seemed like the natural choice of like, oh hey, I wanna go to those people. But since they were a teaching hospital, they were already completely overwhelmed with their own students. They had NP students, residents, med students. They were flooded. Therefore, they just would tell you flat out, like, we don't accept any students that don't go to our school. So there's that. Like I said, add them to your list, give them a quick phone call, but I wouldn't put the majority of your energy in that direction. Now your elevator speech for when you get to talk to a human. Let's make one. When you call these clinics, you're gonna need a well-rehearsed little speech that quickly and efficiently says who you are, what you'd like, and what you have to offer. But you have to do that in a way that doesn't sound quite like begging and Also without sounding like a salesperson. No problem. But honestly, guys, I'm fairly sure that I've cried on the phone to multiple receptionists during this process with lots of like, please, and you don't understand. Don't be me. Guys, don't be me. Practice ahead of time so that you can compose yourself and avoid this embarrassment. Here's an example of what I would say when I called when I finally got my act together. Hello, Susan. Try to get their name. If you do, it's like more personable and they might like you a little bit more. Hello, Susan. I'm Liz. I'm a family nurse practitioner student at Michigan State University. I was calling to inquire about potentially precepting with a provider at your office. Is there any way I can talk to the office manager about this? Or something like that. If they say no, ask for the office manager's contact information. Why not? Because the office manager is the person you are going to need to get through. And most of the time, even when they said no, they still would give me the office manager's contact info and I could at least email them or call them and give them my same spiel. But when you call, the takeaway here is just ask for the office manager, because guys, it's not the providers who get to decide if they're going to take students. It's the office manager. The providers may be out there ready and willing. I had a couple of different providers who told me, yes, I'll precept you, but their office manager was like, nope. So moral of the story, you've got to go through the office manager first. And like I said, if they don't transfer you or just give you a no, try to get the office manager's name. And if you get it, write it down, write their email address down or their phone number. And we'll talk about how to email them or call them in just a minute. So following along kind of with that timeline, we'll assume they said no, or they just gave you the contact info. You're gonna jot that down on your piece of paper with all the contact info you now have. And I usually like to write a little like kind of note about how I was feeling about the whole experience. So if they were just like a hard no, I would probably put like a little sad face next to it to indicate that maybe this wasn't going super well, but you're not gonna give up. You never know. All right. Now we've done one, and you're just gonna repeat that process until someone agrees to talk to you. So now you're on call number 16 and an office manager has finally agreed to talk to you. What are you actually gonna say when you get a hold of them? So glad you asked. That's our next topic. Here's an example of what I would say when I first got an office manager on the phone. Hi, my name's Liz. I'm a third-year nurse practitioner student at MSU, and I'm looking to find a preceptor for my final semester. Would any of your providers be available to collaborate with me on this? Also, side note, when you go into these conversations, before any of this, you're gonna wanna know how many hours you need because they're almost always gonna ask that. All right, rewind. Okay, so you've given your first initial spiel to the office manager, and just remember this, when you are talking with the office managers, you are going to need to sell yourself, and you're gonna wanna make it sound like you're kind of an asset to the team here, because let me tell you, I have talked with a lot of office managers, both during my preceptorships and before them, and when they hear the word student, they don't hear student, they hear productivity sucker. So like I said, you're gonna need to kind of fluff your feathers, sell yourself a little bit. This gets easier and easier the further you're into your program because obviously you've gained more skills. But if this is your first clinical, don't lose heart. We have some tips for that too. So some things you can kind of fluff your feathers with. If you've already been in clinical for a little while, use that to your advantage. Talk about how many hours you've already completed and that maybe you feel very comfortable going in and getting an H&P from your patients, which kind of lets your providers catch up on other tasks while you're in doing that. You could mention how previously you've been able to help with your preceptor's workflow by doing that or other little tasks. Maybe you're super good at writing notes. You could say that. I've had extensive experience with charting. I feel super comfortable with it. Other providers have found it very beneficial to have me write their notes and then they just have to kind of glance at them and sign off on them. If you're brand new, you could always phrase it as, do any of your providers need teaching hours? So in order to get recertified, a certain number of your CEUs as a provider can come from precepting students. So sometimes that's written into their contract, like, you know, I want to have a student for X number of hours so I can get those CEUs. So you could always bring that up if you're brand new and have no other like previous clinical skills. But overall, you just want to make it seem like you're eager to learn, easygoing, and you want to be not the problem child, if that makes sense. Because remember, sites don't get paid for nurse practitioner students. And the reality of the situation is students do take up provider time and efficiency. So for those reasons, we have to be super self-promoters, which kind of stinks and it feels like you're like begging to be trained, but it is what it is, so we gotta do it. Now, let's say the conversation with the manager goes really well. Or maybe they kind of blow you off, but they don't give you a hard no, never talk to me again. Because let's be totally honest, you will take anything other than a no, absolutely not, as a maybe yes. So before you get off the phone with them, ask for their email because we are going to send a resume over to these people. Yes, I would recommend strongly making a resume and getting letters of recommendations for your clinicals. Let's talk real quick about what you're gonna put on your resume. You're gonna wanna list, obviously, your work experience, but the highlight of this resume is going to be your clinical experience if you have some. You're gonna wanna write down the different type of clinical environments you've been in, what skills you've gained by being at those clinics, and the type of patients that you saw. You're gonna wanna include the total number of hours that you did at those places, the procedures you did, what you were able to do independently, the frequent diagnoses you handled, and like, did you chart? What did you do for them as a provider? This will help not only the office manager get an idea of you, but your preceptor as well. And if you don't have any clinical experience yet, just emphasize your work experience. Talk about, do you have leadership roles? Are you organized? What do you have from your work experience that's going to translate well into being a great student at clinical? Anything really that makes you look good. The whole goal of this resume in general is just to give a snapshot of you. Actually, regardless of who found my preceptors, so whether it's when my school found it or when I found it, I always provided them with this resume, and I got a ton of really positive feedback about it from my preceptors, saying they really appreciated seeing in a concise way what I've done, what I'm probably decent at, so that they could guide me in the direction that I needed to learn in. Also, what my background was. So for example, mine was heavily cardiac, GI, kidney, all of that. So I needed to focus a lot on like musculoskeletal, other things that I didn't know, and this kind of gave them an idea of that. So even if you are already partway through your clinical or wherever you are in that journey, I would highly recommend, no matter what, if you do nothing else from this video, making a resume for your clinical experiences. Like I said, I got a lot of positive feedback on it. All right, now for the references, which may seem a little bit cheesy, but when I secured my 2 sites, this is what the office managers later said kind of like sealed the deal for it. So if you have had clinical already, if you had a good relationship with those preceptors, ask them if they would write you and email you or print it for you, a letter of recommendation that you are going to use for future sites. And that's how I explained it to my preceptors. I said, hey, would you be willing to write a letter of recommendation, just kind of saying how I was as a student, and would you recommend me to your peers, honestly, as a student, and have them just include their name and their email address. That's plenty. This doesn't have to be lengthy. Mine were both like literally a couple of sentences long that just said, hey, she was attentive, she was helpful, she was professional. That's all you really need. And if you've never had a clinical before, that's okay. Get one of your nursing buddies to write it. Have someone, your boss, anyone really, vouch for you. I had 1 letter initially, and then I eventually had 2. But you don't need a lot. Like I said, they were really short. But both the managers at the sites that I secured myself, when I said I have references from previous clinical instructors, and ended up saying, like I said, that is what kind of got me in the door. Because for some reason, having another human vouch for you that you're not a total crazy person seems to be helpful. So hey, whatever. Okie dokie. To recap, we've started by making a list of all of our places. We've called them. We've asked to talk to the office managers. If we got a hold of one, we talked, got their email, and asked to send a resume and reference. If we didn't get to talk, we left a message on their voicemail asking them to call us back. And if we got an email, we sent them over our digital elevator speech, our resume, and our references. And now we wait. If you haven't heard anything back, follow up on the sites like once a week. More than that, it's a little bit creepy. And I feel like once a week was usually a pretty good follow-up to kind of like annoy them enough that they eventually called you back, but without being too much where they were like, stop calling me. And if you've waited a week or so and you haven't heard anything, it's time to expand your perimeter, my friends. My clinical sites that I secured for myself were both like 1 hour and 15 minutes away, which stinks, but you do what you gotta do. Also, I can't believe I forgot to mention this. Timing on finding your clinical sites is huge. You're gonna wanna start this whole process like 9 to 12 months before you actually need to be sitting in that clinical. Yes, you heard that correctly. 9 to 12 months. Sites fill up like crazy. And the earlier you start looking, the less crunch time you're running into at the end where you're panicking now and you're like, oh my gosh. And it's always better to just be cool, calm, and collected ahead of time than like the week of starting clinical and you're running around like a chicken with your head cut off being like, please, then you're me crying on the phone to the receptionist, and you don't want that, my friends, you don't. So that method that we just talked about was the method that I used to secure my clinical sites. It worked for me, I hope it can work for you. But if it's not working so hot for you, or you wanna go into other avenues as well, here are some other things that I've heard of and kind of investigated a little bit that have worked for other people. There is a Facebook group called Preceptors for Nurse Practitioner Students, and it has like 10,000 members. Granted, I think most of them are students, but some of them are NPs willing to precept students. So you kind of go on this, you type a little blurb like, this is where I live, I'm willing to travel this far. Can anyone help me? And it's a good networking thing. Some people have even said like, I can't, but I know my friend can. Here's her number. I've seen a lot of people get sites that way, or at least other students kind of be like, I've done clinical at this site. Maybe it would work for you. Call them. So great networking place in case you need something like that. Second thing you could also do is, do you know anyone that works in this field at all? Like, does your daughter's someone in her school, are they a family physician? Great, see if they'll take you. You know, use all of your acquaintances. But like I said, make sure you go through that. You kind of get the okay, soft okay from them, but remember, you have to go through the office manager. I have seen a lot of my friends get the, yeah, sure, like they know someone who's an NP and they're like, yeah, I'll take you, but then their office manager is like a hard no. So before you totally latch onto that and make that your concrete plan, make sure the office manager is okay with it. And this last option, I honestly don't know a ton about, but I know it's out there. You can actually buy clinical sites, which I don't feel great about. I'll be honest. I mean, you're already paying so much for school, but there are websites. If I find any, I'll link them down below, but you can pay for your clinical sites. And I think they pay the preceptor a little bit, and then they provide you, if you pay, they like guarantee that you'll have a site, and it's expensive. You pay usually per hour that you need, and it's like $12. It's a lot of money for what you get, but if you are in an absolute bind, I guess that could be an option for you. And if you've ever used one of those, let me know down in the comments, because I'm kind of curious. It was far too expensive for me to even ever view that as a viable option, and it pains me that we would be expected to pay for on top of school because it's already so expensive. So I didn't really look into it a ton, but I know it's out there. If you want to Google it, you know, pay for NP site, I'm sure Google could help you out there. All right, now my final tip, which I cannot stress enough, guys. You want to know the best clinical site? It might be the one you're already at. So the 2 clinical sites that I secured, I asked if I could come back. One I was at for 3 semesters and the other I was at for 2. And those ended up being sites that I learned so much from, and it was nice because I didn't have to re-secure a site. I just said, hey, can I come back? And it works well in the favor of the clinic, because if they're gonna have students, they at least already know you and you know the system. You're gonna be more beneficial to the provider and the practice as a whole. So always keep that in mind. If you're having a site that you kind of jive with, or you at least feel like, yes, I am learning something and I could do this again, keep that in the back of your mind. So you always want to go into those clinicals, I mean clinical in general, honestly, being professional and someone that you would want to invite back. And if you're interested in my tips on succeeding and standing out in clinical, I made a video on that, and I'll link it up here and leave it at the end of this video for you to check out if you're interested. All right, guys, those are all the tips I have for securing clinical sites in Nurse Practitioner School. And I just want to reassure you one more time that this will be okay. It's all going to work out just the way it's supposed to, which may sound corny, but some of you might need to hear that right now. I know I have spent more tears on finding clinical sites than I would ever care to admit. And you know what? It always worked out, and it will work out for you too. Remember that. All right, guys. Thanks for hanging out with me today. Again, if you're new, I'm Liz. I'm a family nurse practitioner. I make nursing videos like this once a week, and I make a weekly vlog documenting my journey as a new FNP once a week. So if you're into that, consider subscribing below, and join me over on Instagram, where I post clinical tidbits throughout the week. I'd love to have you on my adventure. And if you're coming back, welcome back. Thanks for tagging along with me. Now for the question of the day. What was the name of your favorite teacher or preceptor, not necessarily in nursing or NP school, just ever in general? Selfishly here, I'm looking for some inspiration. So I have my first, she's not technically my student, but I end up working with her part of the time, and I just want to be able to be the best preceptor for her. One of my personal favorite things that my preceptors did for me in NP school was talk me through their rationale. It's like helpful to say like, hey, I do this, but what's more helpful I found, both as in nursing school and NP school, was to tell me why. How did you get to that answer? So tell me who your favorite teacher was and why. All right, guys, hope you have a fabulous week. I'll see you next time. Bye.